public. They're the ones who think, who have very, shall we say, sparse diets, the Spartan way of living, but they rule. And that's what counts, you see. They rule. So that abolishing classes and abolishing exploitation, important as they are, were not enough. It was necessary to abolish domination and abolish the hierarchical structures that nourish domination. And that made me decide most assuredly that I wanted a form of ethical socialism or communism, free of domination, based on confederation, based on an ethics of complementarity in which people feel that they supplement each other instead of ruling each other on an famous order of 1 to 10. And that had I came into the 60s with that whole body of beliefs and tried very much as best I could. By that time I was already, as a man in my 40s, I was well beyond you can't trust anyone over 30 years of age, but yet many young people did have some respect for my views. And so I started writing a series of works. One was called Ecology and Revolutionary Thought, saying that this is, in fact, the age of ecology, just as in the days of Galileo, in the days of the Renaissance, mechanics constituted the dominant social outlook. In the days of Darwin, biology, and specifically evolutionary theory, constituted the ideology of that period, at least in the sciences. And now we were entering the age of ecology. I've since seen this recycled all over the place as though it had never been said before by people writing only a few years ago or only a decade or two ago. I emphasize that, and then I try to point out that the ecological crisis that capitalism was producing and that hierarchical society with its message of dominating nature, a message that even Marx accepted, stemmed really, and this is what I argued, from the domination of people. The ideology stemmed from that domination. In other words, the idea of dominating nature stemmed from the real domination of human by human. And that until we abolished the domination of human by human, not only the exploitation, but the domination, abolished not only classes but hierarchies, we would always have an ideology of dominating the natural world. And that if capitalism was permitted with that ideology and with its enormous technology, mainly a technology revolutionized by competition, by the marketplace, by grow or die, hence grow, 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 or else you die, I came to the conclusion that we had to eliminate hierarchy, domination, classes, exploitation, and we had to completely revise our whole view of what our place is in the natural world. What is our place in the natural world? That involved the whole body of ideas stemming from a dialectical naturalism, as I call it, in which I saw human beings emerging out of nature, but potentially becoming nature self-conscious, aware of itself. So I spoke in terms of the human potential to, as it were, be a self-reflexive, self-conscious nature. And in the right society, finally playing a constructive role in the natural world as a force of nature, as well as in the social world as a kind of eco-social society, which would be in balance with nature. I described nature itself as the evolution of the natural world. I said, what does the word nature mean? A beautiful scene from a mountaintop? Heck. The back of a beautiful picture postcard? Nonsense. Nature is always being that is involved in becoming. And therefore, true nature in the biological sense, first nature, the nature from which we all emerged, is the evolution of life itself into ever greater complexity. A unity of diversity that led to ever greater complexity and offered an ever more subjective, not as yet intellectual or conscious, but an ever more subjective development of that all-important faculty of the ability to make choices. And then, out of that first nature, emerges social nature, or second nature. That is the realm where, even beginning with tribalism, The original ties are structured, social ties are structured around biological facts. They're structured around kinship, they're structured around gender. Those are the basic structures in early so-called primitive societies. They still are coming out of, as it were, the chrysalis, if you like, of the natural world. Age or blood, age ties, kinship, that is what defines your place in the community. Blood, kinship ties, gender, whether you're a man or a woman, there's almost a division of the two cultures, but they complement each other. One is not, above the other. And the third one being the age relationship. Those are the three elements that early societies were formed around, and only with the emergence of cities do you begin to have territorialism instead of the blood tie, class instead of gender, and so on and so forth. So that you do have, in a sense, a kind of emergence out of the natural world, yet retaining ties. The family is still with us, kinship is still with us, age differences are still with us, gender differences are still with us, but they are reworked socially more and more and more. For the worse, in the form of patriarchy, for the worse, in the form of gerontocracies, where the elder rule the younger, and for the worse, in terms of kinship ties, namely nationalism, or the myth, the various myths of nationalism, which disturbed me very much. So it was possible out of this kind of approach to evolve this anti-hierarchical approach and this whole notion of a first, second, and finally, ultimately, a third nature, which would be what we would call socialism, communism, use whatever word you like, with a small c and a small s. We would finally have free nature, namely products of nature called humanity, living in free societies, not only for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the whole biosphere. In other words, I saw nothing wrong with human beings intervening in nature, provided they intervened rationally, provided that they intervened creatively, provided that they intervened with sensitivity. Now, all of this, you see, is sort of percolating out of these, having exhausted, you know what I mean, a whole epoch going back to the French Revolution of the barricades, of the traditional oppressed, specifically the industrial working class, and working with notions of centralization, as we did way back in those days on the old left with ideas of centralized parties, which essentially really duplicated the state they were meant to overthrow. You see? Engaged in battles around industry. And now, going beyond that, I would like to think, in a vision, an eco-anarchist vision, or what I call social ecology more precisely, because I see that ecology is a meaningless discipline from a social point of view, or from an environmental point of view, unless you add the word social onto it. It depends upon the society in which we live that determines what we will do in the natural world. And if we have a society based on grow or die, we're going to destroy it, at least as we know the natural world in its present form, the biosphere as we know it today. Well, all of these ideas collect together into what I would like to think is a coherent point of view. I began at that point in the 60s, after finishing ecology and revolutionary thought. Almost immediately I taught an ecological society in which at that time I explored every possibility, alternative possibility to the existing highly centralized technology and also highly destructive, ecologically destructive technology that we had. Taught a liberatory technology, advanced emphatically the notion of solar power, of wind power, of hydroelectric power, of geothermal energy, of all the different energy forms that we could possibly use that were non-polluting and non-destructive to the environment, which means I was also against big hydroelectric dams as well. Needless to say, in 1964, I was really, in a sense, moving out in the dark, out of the dark in this whole area, because none of this was being explored so far as I know. It was Schumacher who basically quoted my work. It was not I who quoted Schumacher's work.